Hi, everyone. Welcome to Amelia Toelke's Artist Talk here at the Baltimore Jewelry Center. My name is Jen Moore. I'm one of the studio and program managers here at the BJC. If you don't already know about our organization, the BJC is an arts education nonprofit in the heart of the Station North Arts District here in Baltimore, Maryland. We are at the beginning of our ornamenta season, which is our primary fundraising season, and we have a number of events, both in person and online, coming up. We've got a couple great parties. If you're in the area to join, please join us. We have an online talk with Susie Gaunch, as well as a raffle, an online auction, and a little something for everyone. We do rely on this fundraising to bring all of this great programming to you and to our extended jewelry community. And you can help us by either coming to one of these events or donating on our Ornamenta homepage. Some of the things that your donations go to support include youth programs, scholarships, the day-to-day running of our studio, and our year-round residency program, which is part of why we're here tonight. Our most recent mid-career resident is artist Amelia Toelke, who we've been really lucky to have with us here for the past month. So Amelia is a cross-disciplinary visual artist from upstate New York. She holds a BFA in metals and jewelry from SUNY New Paltz and an MFA in visual art from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her practice draws on her training in jewelry and metalsmithing, combined with an exploration of 2D and 3D to build a visual language that explores the profound relationship between identity, culture, and ornament. She will also be having an exhibition in our main gallery, which I'm very excited about, this upcoming August and September. So watch for that coming up later in the year. And I'm going to turn it over to Amelia.
Thank you, Jen. Hey, can I slide this? Okay. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for being here. And thank you so much to the Baltimore Jewelry Center for having me here for a month. It's been such a gift, a luxury to be here focusing on my work among wonderful and inspiring folks in this beautiful city. And, you know, it's been a little strange. I think maybe anybody that's done a residency, it feels a little strange and self-important to be focusing on art when there's so much devastation in the world, like an ongoing war, a lingering pandemic, climate change, recently most destructive earthquakes in history. But when I think about disaster, I think about how important community is, and being here with this community of artists and makers and students and teachers has been equally, if not more, nourishing to my practice than just the unmanaged time away from home. I'm so grateful to all of you, and this has truly been a perfect way to start this year. So on that note, if I can figure out how to do this. Thought I solved it. Oh, there we go. So jewelry is connection. It's the thread that weaves together the different parts of my practice: drawing, sculpture, and wearable things. As a kid, I always liked to make small things. I made beaded jewelry and all manner of objects out of painted polymer clay or actual clay that I dug up in my backyard. By high school, I knew I wanted to study art in college, even though I had a pretty narrow understanding of what this meant or could mean. It was somewhat of a serendipitous fluke that I ended up at SUNY New Paltz, which is a small or small college in New York State that has a highly regarded metals and jewelry program. And at the time, the program was headed by Jamie Bennett, who has since retired, and Myra Mimlich-Gray, who now heads the program alongside Lynn Batchelder. As soon as I took my first basic metals class, I was totally hooked. Not only did I love working with metal, but something about it made me think about the meaning embedded in material and objects. Jewelry is more than adornment. It's our personal signage. And I know I'm speaking to the choir here, and we all know that we can learn a lot from someone's jewelry. But just a little reminder, we can see we learn their style, their taste, their religion, economic status, professional affiliation, cultural identity. Jewelry has since formed the foundation for the way I approach making, and is the way I think about the relationship between art and audience. After I finished school, a group of friends and myself set up studios in an old firehouse. During the 2.5 years while I was set up there, or here in this building, I was making jewelry, but thinking a lot about making sculpture. I was really intimidated about making totally non-functional work, and it seemed like a conundrum that was well suited for graduate school. Working outside the confines of school allowed me to trust that I was ready to deepen my practice and explore new directions in a supportive yet academic environment. This piece here, it was a pretty pivotal part of my kind of next direction in my work. I made it as part of the local sculpture biennial in Kingston, New York. There's a performative aspect to jewelry that negotiates between private and public spaces. When something is worn, it is out in the world on display, which automatically creates a discourse between the wearer and everyone else. With this piece, I was thinking a lot about that space and about other objects that exist in the same realm. And I was thinking about presentation and the role of the heirloom object. So kind of all themes that will be repeated. During graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I studied in the metals area with Lisa Gralnick and Kim Cradler, but was able to work across disciplines with faculty and other departments like sculpture and ceramics. I focused entirely on non-wearable work during the 3 years in school, making sculpture and building a companion drawing practice. I was looking at objects that are laden with meaning, and jewelry, like medals and lockets, seem to carry particularly heavy burdens. I wanted to give these objects the physical weight that matched their symbolic weight. I also wanted to try to replicate the complex feeling of nostalgia. Nostalgia is filled with longing, but it is usually longing for a false ideal, longing for something that never really existed. I was trying to marry the physical tension with the metaphoric tension embodied in objects. And this piece further pushed that tension through absence and implied language. And graduate school, it gave me tools for a sustainable practice. I had the ups and existential downs that I think most people have in graduate school, but I came out of it trusting that art making would always be a part of my life. It also started my drawing practice, which has been one of the most significant and unexpected aspects of the experience. These are a few drawings from my thesis show that were shown alongside the previous sculptures. You can see that I'm playing with similar visual themes, trying to upset our expectations of what things are supposed to do. They're collaged too. They're like different parts painted and then glued together. In grad school, I loved working with the flatness of sheet metal and the way it connected to signage and therefore language. So after graduate school, I continued to explore this material while conflating jewelry and signage and considering the linear quality of chain. With these two pieces, I also really wanted to exploit the space between flatness and objectness. I'm forever asking myself, at what point does an image become a thing or a thing an image? And once an image becomes an object, it gains a back. I wanted to exaggerate this aspect and designed this site-specific sculpture for a year-long show. While there is an intentional contradiction within a blank sign, I wanted to move past the weight and tension that defined the work I did in school and bring a little more lightness to the work. For a year, this piece sat at an intersection in downtown Evansville, Indiana, ready to provide help to passersby, but ultimately providing just the idea of information and the cues of direction. It's really important to me to consider all the elements of a work of art, how a site informs format and material and vice versa. I was really excited to see how people might interact with this piece, since I literally made a graffiti artist's dream canvas with all these blank white shapes. But in the end, it was only tagged once, and the folks in Evansville were nice to kind of wash it off. Installing this piece was extremely rewarding. Folks that lived in the area hosted me, and others intrigued by the art filling up at the center of town helped out by digging, hoisting, and bringing evening beers. After the piece was completed, a man who lived nearby was walking past and stopped to ask about the sculpture. I talked a little bit about it and he nodded and was like, yeah, I totally get it. It's just like all the people here. We're all different, yet we're all the same. It was something like that. But art making can be so insular and lonely. And it's moments like that that really remind you how powerful art can be and why it's worth doing, especially in moments like beginning of the residency. Why am I doing this? And you have a moment like this with someone and then you're like, okay, I can keep going. I incorporate the idea of language a lot into my work, but I rarely use actual words. This is the first and one of the few pieces where I've done that. I don't own any, but I've long been slightly obsessed with nameplate jewelry. It's a unique cultural artifact that has its roots in early Black hip hop culture of the late 1980s. The nameplate necklace was and still is a means of self-proclamation, declaration, and individuality, perhaps even a political revolt against mainstream white culture. In the late 90s, we were introduced to Carrie Bradshaw, the heroine of television's Sex and the City, who wore a personalized nameplate. Since then, this necklace has been absorbed into the collective pop culture consciousness. Home Sweet Home heaps on more layers to this already laden object, combining tropes of signage, namely the iconic Hollywood sign, and sentimental language. Home Sweet Home reflects and celebrates a broader understanding of identity. We all have a relationship to home and to its many connotations. Home can mean different things to different people: a building, a place, a family, a person. As our personal definitions of what home means changes throughout our lives, so does our definition of who we are. And it was fitting that I made this piece just before I moved to a new home on the other side of the world. At the end of 2013, I went to Chiang Rai, Thailand. Friends either thought I was going to live in a grass hut or out in beach paradise. But it turns out that both were far from reality, and the landscape felt a lot more like my native upstate New York. I moved there to accompany my husband, Anthony, who was doing dissertation research on Theravada Buddhism. Anthony's research looks at the intersection of religion, art, community, and craft, specifically in northern Thailand, which is in a region not far from the border of Burma and Laos. It's not only really interesting, but it provided an incredibly unique perspective that brought me to places that I would not have otherwise visited, and to meet people that I never would have met. I had little idea of what to expect and was completely and immediately taken with the colorful and opulent visual culture of Thailand. My surroundings were covered in glittering temples, altars piled with intricately embellished objects, buildings encrusted with ornament, gold leaf, and mirrored tiles, and so many small amulets to wear, hold, and display. Even though I couldn't understand the written or spoken language, I could understand what I saw. All this material culture reinforced my belief in the power of adornment and the way that cross-cultural communication is possible through the visual language of objects and decoration. I was in Thailand for a little over 2 years, and during my time, I created a body of work that drew inspiration from the textures, colors, abundant ornament, and lush landscape. This is the first piece that I made while there, and there's a clear connection to the mirrored mosaic I saw that encrusted many buildings. I was always drawn to decorative motif. I was struck by the similarity of form and shape as compared to what I found looking through Western art history. Ornament was a language that was familiar and that I understood. This piece attempts to mimic the feeling of comprehension without words, the idea that you can understand something inherently, and that adornment connotes importance. This frame, of course, frames nothing, but instead it reflects whatever is in the surrounding space of the sculpture. I enjoy finding the balance between positive and negative, absence and presence. I also like thinking about when is the work really finished? Like with jewelry, the work is finished when worn. Similarly, I think this piece is only completed when people enter the space, when it's activated. And jumping off that concept came this piece. Though I had already had the seed of this piece sketched out before my move, it fully came together after I was living in Thailand. Labels and signage take on added meaning or unmeaning when in a foreign country. But even without understanding written language, we can understand the format. This piece reflects upon the space it is in, as well as reflects what and who is in that space. It, like language, is always changing. Also, dragon fruit is a wild-looking fruit native to Southeast Asia. It is bright pink and spiky, and when you cut it open, the flesh is an even brighter pink with little seeds. Sometimes it's white too. But it's a lot of show and usually doesn't have a lot of flavor. It's not bad, but it's pretty mild, and it's not quite like what you would imagine. To me, this title further underscores the dichotomy between expectation and reality, spectacle and reservation. For almost as long as I was in Thailand, I worked with a local laser cutter. I like the idea of using acrylic instead of the glass that was typically used in the mosaic tile I saw around me. It became a reference point and not an exact appropriation of this skilled craft for my own purposes. Plus, I think something really curious happens with this type of translation. Surface, superficiality, uncanniness, and artifice, they're all concepts that begin to enter the conversation. This is Nung in his shop, and he's the laser cutter I worked with. He owned and still owns a sign shop and was completely amenable to me picking out colors and sending him files. It was interesting to have this relationship where we didn't understand each other's language, but could communicate through material and process. And because of that, there was a collaborative nature to working with Nung. And I think I enjoyed seeing what he was making as much as he enjoyed seeing what strange things I would ask him to cut out for me. Like the thousands of tiny pieces that were cut to create these two sculptures. Made of all black acrylic, these two pieces are incredibly difficult to photograph, but in the detail images here, you can see the layers of small and intricate pieces. Though not mirrored, the surface is smooth and shiny, so it still captures and reflects light. I was looking a lot at jet jewelry, which has a long history of use in Western culture and was extremely popular during the Victorian era because of its association with mourning and modesty. Playing with the tension between opulence and restraint, I combined different pieces of jewelry or parts of jewelry together to create work that sits somewhere between silhouette and form. Also, if you go deep into the archives of my work, I did a group of pieces based on Rorschach ink blots many moons ago, and I've always been fascinated by the way shape can bend and morph depending on who's looking and interpreting. And I always knew that I would kind of circle back there. Amulets, badges, and jewelry were the starting point for Compass. Similar to Transom, I combined and abstracted shapes and symbols from different cultures, from Western military badges and award medals to tied jewelry and ornament. Many symbols were similar, and some were even the same. When mixed together, they all speak the same language. There are two each of 120 unique shapes, and they're all cut by hand. They were all cut by hand and then gold plated. Like the other works, these charms all reflect into the space and soak up the colors of whoever's looking. This is the final piece I'll show from this body of work. I like the simplicity of the piece and the humor in it. When I think about translation and representation, I often ask, how abstract can something be before we don't know what it is anymore? I love the way we try to capture movement or gesture in an image. It seems impossible to capture something as ephemeral as the glint or glare of light reflecting off an object. Yet we all understand what these star shapes imply. They're like exclamation points declaring smooth and shiny and clean and bright. I'd also become somewhat obsessed with a specific style of metal signage. And when Nung, the laser cutter sign maker, agreed to teach me the traditional technique used to fabricate these signs, I jumped on the opportunity. And here's just a couple images showing the process. The traditional tool is on the left, and it's a big piece of copper that you heat up in a flame and then use to melt a fairly low temperature solder. On the right's an electric version of the same tool, which is obviously much easier to use. In the background, you can just barely make out my studio in Thailand, which was an old garage on the property where we lived. It was not fancy at all, but it totally worked. And having an open air studio was pretty great. In early 2016, Anthony and I went back to the States and ended up moving to my hometown of Chatham, New York, which is where we still live. It was a pretty exhausting move, and I was physically drained from hauling my work around the world. When I was set up to start making work again, I was compelled to work small. I also wanted to use a medium that felt more immediate and direct. Collage has always been something that I return to. Cutting things out either with an X-Acto knife or a saw is comforting and familiar. At this time, emojis had become fully integrated into the global vernacular, and they're appearing not just on our phones, but in all manner of advertising and print material. And just as with trying to capture the concept of a sparkle and all the connotations that come with it, I was drawn to the powerful way that these little digital images could stand in for written language and gesture and do what words alone cannot. The emoji hand collages turned these digital images into something tactile and precious. Shiny surfaces were still at the forefront of my mind, and faux gold leaf, being a superficial surface material, seemed like the right medium for these pieces. These are just two selections from the later part of this series. At the same time, I was also doing small drawings or illustrations with watercolor and gouache and collage. And work always has a way of informing work. At some point while making the high five pieces and collecting various images for inspiration for potential drawings, I started to notice that when laid out for display, necklaces, earrings, and bracelets start to look suspiciously like faces. This was such a sweet moment when all my thoughts about jewelry, identity, personality, etc. all came together. Thus was born the ongoing series of gemojis or gem faces. And once you see the face, you can't unsee it. But I love how just 3 elements can have endless possibilities. These pieces clearly and simply pair jewelry with expression. I use gouache, which is the traditional medium of the jewelry designer who paints 2-dimensional versions of jewelry that would then be made by a fabricator. Though my style strays from the more technical drawings of the designer, I think it's important that there is a specificity to my choice of material. I don't have any training in traditional jewelry rendering or honestly working in any kind of paint. And I'm still like after, I don't know, 5, 6 years, maybe more, still really learning the nuances of gouache and mixing color and all of that. When designing these, I sometimes look for the right piece of jewelry to fit an expression, and other times the jewelry already has its own expression. I like this give and take. I also like having fun in the studio, and these were a real turning point in my practice. It's become increasingly important to me to make things that have a sense of joy, both in the doing and the looking. I think that joy and humor are valid entrance points into discussing larger topics, issues, and experiences. I also think it's really important that I don't ever take myself too seriously. And alongside the gem faces has been an ongoing series of gouache paintings that push the graphic qualities of jewelry. I've always loved bringing color into my work, and like material, thinking about how palette is just another variable, like medium, format, and process. I'm interested in exaggerating flatness and finding the sweet spot between abstraction and realistic representation. Bright colors, outlines, and drop shadows are often used with text on posters and in ads, and so I'm using these tropes to conflate jewelry and verbal language. There's a definite visible thread between these pieces and the earlier charm bracelet wall sculptures. With the bracelet sculptures, I use sign materials, flat sheet, and powder coating to make almost entirely flat works that were still 3-dimensional. But with these works on paper, I'm using graphic design strategies to make flat images that allude to 3-dimensionality. I've been fortunate to have this studio space for the last 6.5 years. It expanded a couple of years ago because I needed storage space for my artwork. But that meant that this past fall, I was able to really do a big studio renovation and set up a space that was dedicated for working a little more cleanly. Having a space that's equipped with jewelry tools and a drawing area was pivotal in getting me back to the bench. I had not been making jewelry or even really working in metal very much, mostly just some wedding bands for friends and samples for teaching classes. But then suddenly all my drawing of jewelry made me want to make jewelry again. And fortunately, I had the tools to do so. I wanted to see the image of the object translated back into an actual object. It feels completely natural to me to move back and forth between the 2 mediums, allowing the drawing to inform the jewelry and the jewelry to inform the drawing. Some of these brooches have accompanying drawings and some do not. Some came before the drawing and some came as a response to the drawing. As with the drawings, I love the way chain is and acts like a line, creating shapes or symbols. I like playing with traditional charm shapes and iconography and exploring the endless potential a line offers. Seeing stars naturally evolved from the charm bracelet brooches and of course the charm bracelets I was and had been drawing. Not only did I want to make the individual zodiac brooches, it was necessary for me to see them all in one tableau as a map of the stars, as if they were their own drawing or sculpture. Here, adornment and presentation are both used as conceptual strategies. Charms are mini collections of experiences that map out our lives. The constellations are these random groups of stars that we have defined and given meaning to. They help us navigate and orient ourselves physically and often emotionally in the world. A charm makes an experience meaningful, and the constellations help us understand the cosmos and our place in it, or in them, I don't know. In that way, these brooches are like mini maps that help us navigate our lives. In addition to making my own charms, I also incorporate pre-owned charms. I like the way that vintage charms have their own histories and that those are embedded into whatever new life they take. I want to push what the charm can do, that it is not an isolated item, but that it's part of a larger story. And now the pendulum swings again. Sometimes I still need to make sculpture. This piece came as a direct result of drawing, and specifically with making the gem faces. For a long time, drawing had been a break from sculpture, but this piece was actually a much needed break from the detailed drawing process. Like the brooches, this piece is such a simple and direct manipulation of materials, yet it does everything that it needs to. In May of 2020, when most of us were still in lockdown, my friend Andrea and I had an opportunity to make this piece a reality. To commemorate Susan B. Anthony's 200th birthday and the centennial of women's suffrage, the Rochester Contemporary Art Center in Rochester, New York, and the Susan B. Anthony House awarded a grant for a temporary public art commission. Public art was the perfect antidote to COVID restrictions. Big, bold, and bright, these buttons reference political images and slogans, but without advocating specific beliefs or positions. Instead, political statement itself and the hard-won right to give voice to political ideas emerge as the medium and the message. Andrea and I designed some of the buttons, but we also invited 5 local Rochester artists, Amanda Chestnut, Tanya Day, Erica J, Abiosa Spriggs, and Theven Stephen, as well as the Seneca Art and Culture Center at Ganondagan to contribute designs. Collaboration was already central to making this piece, and we felt it was essential that we were not the only voices represented. Andrea teaches engineering and technology at a public high school in Warsaw, Indiana. She also can do anything and does not see fabrication challenges as a hurdle. She's a great collaborator. Her school was kind enough to give us reign of her classroom, and for 2.5 weeks, we turned that space into a button factory. This piece became part of a larger collaborative project that also involved curating exhibition titled Worn at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in the spring of 2021. Andrea and I continued to make time and space to work together on other ventures. Around that same time, things in my studio at home were growing in scale. About 4 or 5 years ago, I'd started to work with 24 karat gold leaf instead of the fake stuff, which I'd used in the emoji collages. I felt that the fake leaf was technically limiting because it had to be sealed or it would tarnish, and even then it could turn. I also felt that conceptually it no longer fit with what I wanted to do. Plus, gold is gold and illuminates in a way that is unmatched by even the best fake. These are some of the first pieces I did using real leaf, and I learned a lot. Well, on the left, you can see the different sizes. So you definitely feel a little bit more precious with the real leaf, which is on the left side. I started to figure out what kind of brushes to use to put down the gold sizing, which is the specific glue used to adhere the leaf. I learned to tint the sizing. I learned that paper is very porous and needs to be sealed. And I learned that not every paper is up to the task. I also learned that after doing these, I wanted to add more color again. So I started to break out the colorful tubes again. But I love that gold leaf has a depth and materiality. And I like contrasting that with with graphic imagery and with the flatness and matte opacity of gouache. I like the way that the process of leafing is also very hands-on and that it brings a tactility to the work that is appropriate to the images I create. I can create impossible objects that when rendered in gold leaf, they seem like they could exist. Even though they're flat, they're almost objects, but not quite. And these objects can exist between jewelry and sculpture and between representation and reality. They have weight, and at the same time, they're weightless. To me, there's a strong relationship between these pieces and my jewelry. They speak the same language but maybe they speak different dialects, or maybe they speak the same thing in different languages. I don't quite know, but that's why I keep going. And I'll leave you with this video of one of the most recent pieces that I completed over the summer. It's also a little peek into how I keep things tidy despite being a messy worker. Over the years, I've learned how to protect myself from my messy ways, and really excited about the movement in this piece. And as I've been working this past month, I've been thinking about that a lot, thinking about what keeps me engaged and inspired as an artist, when to trust an idea and when to follow an idea, even if I don't trust it. Oops. There we go. Thank you all for listening. For those who are here, and for all of you who tuned in at home in the interweb. Thank you.
Answer questions.
Either.
You kind of angle the computer so they can kind of see what there's.
I have a
There are a
question.
couple things that I've been sort of working on. I don't know. Let's see how long this portal. Uh-oh, there's a big knot in it. I've been working on some 2D stuff and a few 3D things. I did some casting. Oh, right. We don't need the projector. Sorry.
Hi, Amelia.
Hi.
Your cousin
Okay.
Ellen, I have a question.
You have a question? Okay.
Yeah.
What's your question?
I love your work. Is it for sale, or what how do you market what you produce, and do you sell it to people?
Yeah, I mean, isn't everything everybody makes for sale? I'm just kidding. I don't, it's always a hard question to figure out, I guess.
Well, like, do you have a website that this is for sale at X price, or you're not doing that hard sell?
I have jewelry on a website, but other 2D stuff I don't have, or like sculpture I don't have listed.
Well, it was so fabulous. I'm so proud. Love it.
Thanks for joining in.
Could people contact you if
Oh.
they're interested in the 2D work? Like, I know you had it for sale at when you had your open studios last summer.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Shane. Okay, does anybody else have any questions?
It's really nice to see you work at all these different scales. And my question was, do you know from the beginning what scale it's going to be? Or sometimes something end up being much bigger and translated into sculpture when it might have been starting with this. Like, do you know right away, like what kind of scales you want to work on?
Often it like will come together, but then sometimes like I feel like there's the variables of like scale, content, material, process. And I feel like those are all like floating around, and then I might have like either a material that I want to work with, and I'm like, I know there's potential there, or I have an idea that I want to work with, and I'm just sort of, and I'll like kind of keep it going and then wait for them all to kind of line up correctly. So it's a little bit of both, but usually like it'll all of a sudden kind of like come into focus if I have like the little bit of an idea. But I think sometimes right now I'm having a little like, I'm a little less sure sometimes, like, and then sometimes I just will do both, I guess.
There was a question from Laura Fortune about how long your residency was and what you're doing next.
It's a month, and I go home next Wednesday, and then I will be home doing that stuff.
Hey, Amelia.
I have a show that I'm working towards that'll be in Hudson, New York at the Turley Gallery in May. And then I'll be working on, so I'll be kind of more immediately working on that, and then working towards the show here in August.
Will the show in May be 2D and 3D?
It'll be 2D. Yeah.
Amelia,
Yes.
it's Heidi.
Hi.
Hi. I am totally blown away by the layers of everything, both material and thinking and I don't, it's hard to go into a piece of work like yours, just knowing all that you know. And it opened my eyes to see so many things because of your great explanation and your obvious brilliance in doing this. So really, thank you. Really. Yay.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm a fan.
It's your other cousin again. I mean, I feel like you need to be featured in some national art kind of journal. I mean, I swear to God, it's so unique in the way you did it. Let's make it happen.
Sure.
I'll call my people. Okay.
Thanks, Ellen.
Do you prefer working abroad, and will that be a continued practice moving forward?
I don't think I don't think it's like a preference. I think there's something really useful about being somewhere and being restricted in a way, whether that's like you only bring a certain amount of things with you, or you can't figure out where to get the thing that you need, so you go get something else. So I think that so many creative solutions come out of like scarcity or like problem solving, because you're like, well, I can't get this thing, so now I have to do that. Or so having limitations can be really useful. So that, in addition to just being in a new place, which is always, I think, no matter what, it's always going to have some kind of inspiration. So that, alongside with limitations, can be really, I think it can just be really useful. So yeah, so it's not a preference, because then I think there's also something really great about being in your own space and being able to get all the things you need. So I think that I think it can be really productive to be able to do both, and I feel like I'm very fortunate that I had the opportunity to be somewhere in another country for over 2 years and experience that. But even, coming here, I made a point actually to not bring that much stuff with me, because I'm the kind of person that even if I go away for a weekend, I'll bring like 100 activities to do and like 3 books, and don't do any of them. So I actually was like kind of specific in what I packed to bring with me, and tried to not overdo it, and been trying to like just for the most part use what I have.
You've already had a show in Seattle, and I was wondering if you had any plans to come back and what it takes to do that.
I mean, I'd love to come back to Seattle. I think it's, having someone want you to have a show there.
How did the Bellevue thing get set up?
My friend and I applied. So Ellen's talking about a show that my friend and I organized. This is back in 2014 or something, and so we applied to have it there, and they were they accepted it. They were generous and invited us there.
Well, let's do it again.
Okay. Sure. I like that idea. I like Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about your sculptural work only being finished when someone was in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe you feel the same way about jewelry, it's only finished when someone's wearing it. But then what about the 2D work?
Oh, that's a good question.
I also don't know where you show that work. So maybe I just missing information.
I still think that for me, it's important to have something exhibited. So it's different than something being activated.
Yeah.
But I do find it I'm not very precious about my work. And I think to me, it's I make it and then it exists in the world. And So in some ways, it doesn't really feel finished until maybe I frame it and then it's up and other people can have an exchange with it. So it's a different kind of activation, but it's an exchange. So it's not like inherently part of making the work like complete in the same way as like jewelry or like some of the mirror pieces. But yeah, I think it's really important that there's a public aspect to it. Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah.
So you work obviously in many different media and similar icons go throughout. But I wonder, do you feel personally like when you're making, is it the same artistic thing that's being expressed through different media? Or do you think about like making in different ways? Like are certain things more design oriented, other things are more art oriented, or is it all the same to you?
I mean, I do make some jewelry that I feel like is design and not art, and I think that that's okay. But I think like for the other, any work that I kind of consider art, and even the jewelry that's designed, I do feel like they're all talking about the same thing, but in different ways, and they're able to talk about the same thing in a way that, like, I guess it's like, what's that like allegory of the describing the elephant, like the what like I don't remember it exactly, but yeah, like all these different people are describing what an elephant looks like or feels like, but they have different parts of, or they're describing different parts of it, and so they're all right. It's not really a good analogy. That was but I kind of just feel like all my work is about the same thing, but like can do it in different ways. And I feel like when one, and that's when I think when I work back and forth, it's like when sometimes it's because I just sort of feel like I need a break, like physically, but other times it's like, okay, I kind of already talked about this in this way. Like I now need to talk about it this way. So it feels like it's a natural, like push and pull, like dialogue with the idea. Yeah, thank you.
I have two questions. I was really struck by what you said about like the transference of image to object and object back to image. I was curious with the wax working that you're doing, because Amelia has been casting replicas of all these like wonderful little like vintage and like found charms, like the object to object. Is there anything kind of in your mind about that? Does that feel different? I don't have a super formalized question.
No, that's okay. I mean, I have to say, like doing this process, it's a little bit, it's the first time that I've actually done that, because usually I'll work with vintage charms. And I've even like, sometimes I'm like, I should make my own, and I haven't really like in terms of carving charms, but I like the found material. And I kind of cast these as a means to an end because a friend had lent me a bunch of charms to eventually make something with. And so I just cast a few of them, and they're sort of, and it's funny to have like the multiples. So I don't actually, it's very new territory. So it'll be interesting to see, like, I don't know, now I've got like 5 spaceships, like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna do with that? I don't know.
One for each Apollo mission.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of little scooters.
The next thing is more of like a kind of just comment, and I hope you're okay. I didn't ask ahead of time if it's okay to share this, but in our conversations, there was just a lot of talk about like just the vulnerability of how hard it is to make art and how hard it is to feel like permission to make art. And I found that actually really inspiring. I think a lot of people who consider like someone who's had as much exposure and as many shows as you've had, who would be considered a mid-career artist, wouldn't necessarily confront that sort of, whether we want to call it a demon or not, wouldn't necessarily confront
It's
that.
a demon.
Yeah, and I wonder, I think it can be really inspiring, depending on I haven't looked at the roster to see who's on the call, for other people to hear like that's just a really like, for you, and I think for many artists, a really like natural human thing to have to kind of not always feel like ready to make art every day and just have to go forth no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of my time here has been like the first 2 weeks, it was like just a lot of thinking and trying to understand, like, is it okay to make this? Should I make this? Like, I don't know what direction to go in. And it's been a little bit of how I felt this whole last year. Maybe like a little unsure of like which thing is art, which thing isn't art. And like, then, but I like make that definition, or like who makes that definition. And it's like, well, I'm deciding it, but then it's like, why can't I decide? And it's confusing, but I think that what's been really amazing about being here actually is that even though I maybe haven't made as much stuff as I want, I feel like I've made a lot of mental progress. Like, I think having to grapple with that and confront that, it's really important. Like, it's not like making art, I think doing anything is not always just like this upward trajectory, you know? There's, I don't know, you can't always be like making amazing things or making like feeling inspired all the time. It's not sustainable. And I don't think it's a reality, you know? And I've like really, really appreciated our conversations, because I just to have that opportunity to talk through it and not feel like, well, you should just push through. I mean, like, I don't know. It's just like, it's okay to feel like that and talk about it and have it be a part. It's like just as a valid part of your practice to like have to have those questions as the making.
Yeah.
And so much of our culture is just like, you got to make, you have to produce, you have to do all these things. And like, again, that's not sustainable. And yeah, and then it's like, why? Like, yeah, it's important to, I don't know, take the time to think, I think.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Amelia, it's Heidi.
Hold on one second, Heidi. There's one more question.
Okay.
Do you think like part of that insecurity comes from being in the jewelry field as well, like specific to like working in a field that some people think of as design and some people think of as art, and that being a bit, not that I think that it's like a need to distinguish, but I think that comes with that sort of doubt, I guess, of like, what am I doing?
I think it probably plays a role, and maybe because I'm moving back and forth between mediums, so it's like sometimes like, I think one thing I really like about jewelry is that it can often exist in the gray area, but then I think it can also get confusing when it's like everything starts to blend together. I know for me, I can find it I think that's part of, I think maybe making more jewelry has been both like really exciting for my practice, but maybe also making it more confusing. Like, it was an easier line when I wasn't making as many wearable things. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just is a thing that but yeah, I think you're right. Actually, I hadn't quite thought about it that way. Yeah, like that, because
Jewelers are apologists.
Yeah.
There's the
Maybe, yeah.
apologetics.
Yeah, but I think also I'm definitely someone that's has a lot of self-doubt, so that's already like my natural state of being. So when you add any of these other things into the mix, it just gets harder and stickier. Yeah. Heidi, did you have a question?
Yes, and a comment. Do you ever use other pieces of jewelry that fell apart and reconstruct something from, you know, things that used to be jewels, sort of like found objects that were part of earrings or part of bracelets? Do you ever incorporate anything that you didn't actually make?
Yeah, I was I've been doing that with some vintage charms and making those into new pieces, and vintage chain, like vintage charm bracelets,
Right.
vintage
Right.
necklaces. So yeah, and not all the time, but I like the way like vintage elements bring in other stories. It's also nice to, well, also like jewelry, there's such a long history of transforming jewelry into other jewelry or modifying it. And then also it's nice to like, you know, there's so much material in the world already. So when there's an opportunity to like to use something or reuse it, it's always feels kind of good.
I was really struck by the aspect of communication, nonverbal communication, which is something that is dear to me, but just symbol and how people interpret the symbol and the meaning that might go in, and not understanding a language, but having a symbol that might resonate with to connect. It's very powerful. And I mean, when I saw the happy face with 2 yellow poles on the ground, I thought, oh my God, that is fabulous. If I were walking by there, it would be like, whoa, who did this? You know, I mean, it immediately made me happy. I guess that's the other thing, that when you do things that are sort of like your faces or whatever, they have an emotion to them, and I had emotional response, which
Well,
was great. And also, as far as presenting, I live outside Northampton, and it's an arts bonanza here. And if you could send me a way that I could, like, there's a Smith Art Museum here. There's a lot of littler things, and I think you'd be really appreciated in this area. So I'll be your in between, whatever that means. Okay.
Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah.
Any
I
other
thought Heidi was going to say she had a lot of old jewelry to sell you or to send you.
You're right. I was going to say that actually, but I didn't. I've been finding bags. I mean, literally, like today I found one in my car when I was looking for my last cell phone.
Most people
Like
find
this plastic bag of jewelry stuff.
You sound like
I'm getting it. Huh? I'm getting it all in one place, but it's very astute. It's just been presenting itself to me, and I thought, and then, you know, seeing this, I thought, yeah, boy, you would either have a really good time or you'd say, oh my God, this is just,
Rick.
but I
Rick.
have it if you need it. All right. Very perceptive of you.
Yeah, well, you could get loads of stuff from us, so we'll check first.
Were there any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Amelia. I'm so glad that we get to have a little bit more time with you. We often have these talks at the very end. We still have another week. And
I love
then,
it.
as Jen said, and you echoed, you'll have a solo show here at the end of August into September. So if you're local, come out. We're really excited about that. Yeah, thank you all for coming tonight. And as Jen said at the beginning, it is our big fundraising party coming up in March and April. So check that out. And if you feel so inclined, donate. Donations make projects and programs like this residency possible. So thanks for coming out. So wonderful to see folks.
Thanks for doing this.